My Van and Melonine, and well met indeed. I'm Arich here, Galadirth, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to Divide and Conquer version 4.5, as we deal today with Mordor's faction overview. The time is 9:10 in the morning, and I've been up for a while actually, so it's not too bad. But let us dive straight in. Oh, I'm on the wrong page, hang on. I write down what I should go through so I don't miss things, and I still manage to miss things. Number 1, starting size and army. Mordor, as many of you know, are second place, I believe, in terms of starting size, only behind Gondor, who is the biggest nation at the start of the game. But you have loads of regions. Thaurband is your most southerly point, and Seregost is your most easterly, but do note that Nirn is broken up, so Nirn is the big one here around the sea. Thaurband has that region, and Seregost is the large one on the east. So your two easterly regions are actually only 2 regions, and they take up loads of space. The others are all very crammed in. Cirith Ungol is an absolutely tiny region, but the size of the region doesn't matter. You have plenty of regions. You get the garrisons in each of them, which is normally a couple of units of generally orc trash, and so you won't have anything particularly powerful at the start of the game. And you will also note so far as I've clicked through that you're only seeing orc portraits, and that's something that we'll get onto in a moment in version 4.5 if you haven't played it already. So your starting size, you've got lots of cities, lots of settlements, but your army's not gigantic, but it can easily be made big. Custom generals then, one of the key custom generals is of course Leofric the Bowed, who begins in Barad-dûr, and he comes with Temple Marksman, so he is a ranged bodyguard, which is pretty useful. Other than that though, I don't think anyone else other than possibly our old friend Gothmog has a custom bodyguard, and indeed Gothmog comes with Morgul Chosen. So he's a very defensive general. Otherwise though, they are all just your stock Mordor bodyguards, so nothing supreme or acceptable. Acceptable isn't the word I'm looking for. I should have stopped after supreme. Family tree. Of course, you don't have a family tree. You are a Teutonic nation, and your leader is Sauron the Dark Lord. Now, the way that Sauron works in this game is that he actually stands up in the corner, which I think, if we toggle Fog of War, you can probably see him. I think we did look into possibly sending him off map, but there must have been some reason why we didn't do it. And we're going back years now that Sauron has been in the top right corner, and I can't really remember the reason as to why, but he's up there, and he doesn't join you, of course, till you get the ring. But it does mean that you just cannot be regicided, because he will not die until you get the ring. But then a human player never gets registered anyway, particularly not as Mordor. Your victory conditions as the single most evil nation in the game are to hold 80 regions, including your capital. Sauron wants dominion, and you have the highest province requirement of any nation. But you will note it doesn't matter where you take it from. You are totally free to turn on everyone and anyone, because you are Sauron, and dominion of all is your goal. They may be your allies now, but allies are transitory, and they will not be allies forever. So turn on anyone you want. Your 80 regions is actually quite a lot. There are 199 regions that you can conquer in the game, or 198 actually, because you can't capture this big one at the top, which is also the big one at the bottom. They're the same region. So there are 198 regions, and you need 80 of them. That's almost half of the entire map. So, I mean, if you took it mostly from the bottom, I think you'd probably have to take most of Ravanian, but you could play Mordor without ever going into Eriador, so that area you can leave to someone else. Angmar, maybe. Turning to the geographical location, of course, Mordor is unfortunately a very easy campaign for one key reason, or in fact 2 key reasons. And those 2 key regions are the Efelduath and the Ered Lethui, the Ash Mountains and the Mountains of Shadow, because they offer you insane protection. The only way through into your heartland of your realm is through the Black Gate and through Minas Morgul. The easterly access point is, of course, very, very vast, but only Khand or Rune will ever really come through there, and you'll be allied to them for most of the game. So you've got a lot of protection for your core heartland. And that then brings us on to custom battle maps, which is also something you're blessed with. So the Morannon, Durthang, Cirith Ungol, Minas Morgul, and Barad-dûr are all custom settlements, which gives you variety if you're ever defending them, but also gives you excellent industrial power, because you start with citadels and large towns galore. I didn't realise that all 4 of those are citadels, actually, including Barad-dûr. I think we should possibly change that. That might certainly impact the reason why Mordor has so much stack spam, blimey. I didn't realise all 5 of them were citadels. I thought at least one would be a large town. That definitely plays a part in why Mordor's so good. But then Mordor actually do not get a benefit from castles. You're one of the only nations in the game although possibly in version 4.5 you do, but in version 5 in the future, you're one of the only nations in the game that has no advantage to military from castles or towns, because your troops are so easily produced anyway, there's no need to have a benefit to castles. So it wouldn't have mattered if we changed them anyway. But you've got a lot of custom battle maps. That brings us on to your neighbours and your diplomacy. Well, of course, you've got Gondor to your west, and you start a war with them. You've got Khand and Rune to your east, but I think you don't start allied to both. Ah, no, yes, you do. So you're allied to Harad, you're allied to Khand, you're allied to the Easterlings, and you're allied to the Ardenaim. You're also, of course, allied to Dol Guldur, and far away you're allied to Angmar. You start at war with Gondor and Dol Amroth. So not Rohan, not Dorwinion, the other two nearest enemies. Now, Dorwinion is unlikely to really ever be a proper enemy. They've got too many things going on, and Rune generally beats them. But Gondor and Dol Amroth, of course, you'll probably come across. Specifically, Gondor, most of your game will be against. Rohan, a little way to the way on the west of Gondor, you might come into contact with them, depending on how quickly you steamroll through Gondor's defences. Turning to economy then, you are orcs, so you cannot get strongholds. So castles actually aren't all that great for you anyway. You can only get to the second tier, the castle tier. Keep castle stronghold, you only get castles. So you get a little bit of a minor drawback if you take castles, but in towns you have no drawback at all. But do note that in version 4.5, orc battle maps are awful. Partly it is intentional to provide some sort of detriment to the absolute tidal wave of your success, which you will have as you play as Mordor. It's definitely one of the easiest campaigns in the game, but towns are awful to defend. So if you capture a town and upgrade it to be one of your own towns, they are garbage. Now I do like this, it is thematic, but I do feel the only thing that bugs me is why would you take over a town, for example, like Calenhad, which has high, tall stone walls, and then completely level it to build a camp with a palisade wall. You just wouldn't. I can totally appreciate that the orcs are, again, to use the word twice in the same episode, they are transitory. They move around, and their camps, their towns would just be that. They'd be camps, tents, makeshift. They don't settle anywhere. Orcs aren't that kind of people, or that type of race. But what they would not do is completely negate a massive tactical advantage because they don't know how to build walls. They don't need to know how to build walls in order to use walls. So that's something that we hope to change in the future. But at the moment, do note when you upgrade anyone's town or settle or city, the battle map is an absolute nightmare to defend. So defending as the orcs is quite tricky. So do watch out for that. But turning to the actual buildings that you can build, we will go to the browser. You don't get very many as Mordor, if I'm honest. The only guild you get is the Fighter's Pit, which gives you orc fighters and orc hunters, and that is all. It then gives you the melee weapon bonus at the top tier, the Gothmog's Hall. It says +2, but you can't actually get +2. That needs to be changed. But Gothmog's Hall, of course, is one in the entire world, so you may never actually get that. The AI is very good at getting guilds. I do not know why. They don't get guild point bonuses. They don't get building bonuses. We've taken away almost all bonuses that the AI get, other than their units get a bit more of morale, and generally speaking, their units train with a couple of experience points. But that is it. They don't get any actual economic boosts. The only thing I can think is that the AI simply can't go bankrupt, but the bankruptcy script only gives them somewhere between 50 and 500 gold, which is not enough to build most buildings. So I don't know how they do it, but they really get lucky with guilds, and they build them way before you will. Other than that, though, as I say, there aren't too many buildings for yourself, I am afraid. You do get the advanced blacksmith, and being orcs, you get it basically in every large city in the world. Particularly, you'll note you'll get it in Minas Tirith and places in Gondor and Dol Amroth. So you do get that, but outside of that, there's not much going on. We'll talk about Black Númenóreans later. But we can talk about their building. You do get the Black Temple and the Black Castle, which gives you the Black Númenóreans, and that can only be built in Durthang. So they only come out of one location, but that's more sort of leading into gameplay events. You don't get ships, of course. The orcs famously do not like to sail, and although many of you will now scream at me saying, but in the film they attack across the river, and there's one thing crossing the river on makeshift rafts, and there's an entirely another thing sailing the Great Ocean. So you don't get ships. You can train mercenary cogs, everybody can, but you don't get to train any ships from your ports. And your diplomat, of course, comes from Barad-dûr, from the tower itself. along with Sauron's will, actually. That's good to note. So you'll only get your diplomat out of there. So then we come to gameplay events. There are only really two things that change up Mordor's gameplay, and the first many of you will know, and some of you will be asking, actually, where are they? And that is, of course, the Nazgul. The Nazgul, to make the Mordor's campaign at least a touch harder, the Nazgul have been sent off to find the ring. There's a message that pops up at turn 1 to tell you this. So they've been sent away, and they've gone to try and find the ring, and they will come back every sort of, I think it's 10 to 15 turns. It was I think initially it was 10 turns, but I don't know if we extended it to 15, but no, I think it might be 10. So you'll get one at turn 10, you'll get another at turn 11, at turn 20, sorry, then 30, 40, 50, up until you have them all. But remember, 3 Nazgul are with Dol Guldur, so you won't ever get them. There's Chieftain Lagaran, it's a Glarakor, and then of course Kumul, and the others are all with you eventually. They have been sent off map at the moment, and then they come back when the time is right. And they'll spawn again. But they haven't actually been sent off map because of the way that the Nazgul respawn. We can't send them off map because then the game just regenerates them. So we have to tinker with the script. But we did. And so they won't come back for those 10-turn intervals. And that then also leads on to the fact that the Nazgul are immortal. So if once a Nazgul dies, he will respawn 15 turns later at Barad-dûr. You need to hold Barad-dûr in order to continue the respawning ability. Also note that if Dol Guldur dies, you get their Nazgul respawn to you as well, which does give you a bit of an incentive once you've become powerful enough to just take Dol Guldur out, because then you'll get their Nazgul for you as well. Do note though that in version 4.5, which you're all playing at the moment, Nazgul, oh yes, and when you click on the Nazgul you get their story. There's Leofrix. Do note that the Nazgul now come with dismounted bodyguards. The only one who has a horse now is the Witch King, and he doesn't come till about turn 60 or 70. So you won't get your absolutely monstrous cavalry bodyguard that plagued Mordor's early game previously. The other gameplay event is a very, very minor one. If you're allied to Rune, you can train some runic units out of the Black Gate. If you're allied to Khand, you can train some Khandish units out of the Black Gate. And if you're allied to Harad, you can train some Haradrim units out of the Black Gate, as you can see there. And it's the same as well with the Tower. You get the same units out of the Tower of the Moon as well. It takes a turn for the runic ones to actually show up, because we are allied to them. Easterlings of Rune, there they are, but their units haven't showed up yet. Oh, no, I'm lying to you. The runic units come after the barracks event. That's why they're not there yet. So you get a few units through mostly cavalry to supplement the fact that you have almost no cavalry, as we'll see in a moment, from the Morannon and from Minas Morgul, and then when the barracks event hits, you get some elite runic units as well. So that's a nice little addition to your gameplay which spices up the otherwise bland army of orcs. Although I'm letting my bias through. I absolutely hate Mordor. I could think of nothing worse than playing as them. I think their roster is devoid of of variety and enjoyment. And you may be saying, but Galu, you're the modders, why don't you just change the roster? But don't get me wrong, the roster is set up perfectly for how Mordor would have their roster. I just think orcs are a really boring race. They're so one-dimensional. Kill, 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 kill. And it just does not entertain me in any way. So I've never played as Mordor in my life, but we do have plans to change Mordor a bit. We've done the odd bit of tweaking, and something I would love to bring in for Mordor, because I think they should definitely be the nation that definitely has the feature, is essentially make them the evil Northern Dunedain. So at the moment, the Northern Dunedain have their beacon system, which allows them to train troops through the mercenary system from all the good nations in the world. The Ardenaim have a subjugation system, which is the same nations that the Northern Dunedain can train troops from peace. The Ardenaim can train them from war. And I think that Mordor should have a blanket, almost, subjugation system, whereby the good nations, I don't think they would get to fight for them. Good nations would always rebel against Sauron. You'd never fight for Sauron because he wants to completely dominate you and slaughter all those who stand against him. But I think all the orc nations, there should be some sort of like levy system, because Sauron, of course, is the big bad. All of the evil in Middle-earth at the moment is pretty much down to him, bar the odd exception of examples of human evil or dwarven evil. But generally speaking, the overarching threat of doom in Middle-earth comes from Sauron, and I think there needs to be some sort of link between Mordor and the other nations. But other than just throwing troops at Mordor, which often gets downvoted when I suggest that in the modding team, we need to think of something that makes Mordor really stand out as the evil nation, but I don't know what to do yet. But anyway, those are the gameplay events for Mordor. There aren't really many scripts, of course. Oh, and the ring. Yeah, once you get the ring, bring it back, you get Sauron. That's the ring. If we go up and have a look, we might be able to see Sauron as he stands. Oh, we do, but you can't actually see his unit because his icon is himself. We might be able to put his unit in custom battle, actually. I think we can. Yes, we can, because he was there last week, wasn't he? So there we are. So that's Mordor. So now we can jump over to the battle map. Last week I said I was going to do a poll on the difficulty, and it turns out that YouTube is discontinued polls some time ago, because apparently no one used them, and so YouTube doesn't want to devote any effort or time into them, so they just cut them out of the system. So you can't do polls on YouTube anymore, and I don't want to set up a straw poll for the difficulty. I don't want people to have to go to another website. So instead, please just comment down below how difficult you think Mordor is and your reasons why. My gut instinct would be that they are a 1. They're such a boringly easy campaign. And it's just one of those things, isn't it? If you really like Mordor, it doesn't matter that the campaign's simple and boring. You'll enjoy covering the world in your taint. But for me, it's just, I have nothing that draws me to this faction at all. Absolutely nothing. But anyway, we shall jump over to the battle map and look at their roster. Welcome then to the plain of Mordor, where the armies are assembled, and as mentioned in the first half of this video, you have almost no cavalry at all. Your first cavalry unit comes in, statistically, in your elite tier, and not even your elite tier really, your sort of uber tier, because they're all rare up there. So cavalry is something you really have to rely on allies for. You are the dwarves of the orcs. Which doesn't make any sense at all. One thing that you are, though, is whilst Mordor does get a lot of units, and numbers is a thing for Mordor, you aren't the Horde nation. That honour does go to the Misty Mountains. And one thing that is therefore marked in your roster is you don't really have a real trash tier. So your Orc Band and whatnot, this first tier is very much more militia, in that they actually do have enough. They do enough to make some damage to your enemy. They are not snagger, is what I'm trying to get at. Real trash is anything that's 1 or 2 points. So 2 defense, 1 attack, 2 attack, 1 defense, anything around that. That is utter trash. They will just die. These units might actually do something. So we'll start with the Orc Band, one of your first. They are anti-cavalry, they do have a spear, but their attack is 1. But what makes them stand out is that they do have a total defense of 4. So they will actually hold the line a little bit against other early tier things. They won't kill basically anything. They are quite possibly one of the worst. Spear units are not very good against infantry, and having only a 1 attack anyway means they will just do terribly if they try and kill anything. But they will hold quite nicely, while some of your other units, as we'll see in a minute, will do some killing. Orcs, generally speaking, are slower than the normal speed by a couple of points, so you're ever so slightly slower. Your morale is poor, your morale response is poor. That's not a surprise. Supporting them are the Orc Raiders. Now, this unit is a sword and board, although they don't all use swords. Some of them have swords, some of them have what looks like ice picks or pickaxes. Some of them actually just have axes. They now have an attack that might do something against earlier tier units, but again, a low defense of 4. So whilst they're not trash, they're only just out of that margin. They're not going to any parties of here be killers or anything like that, because they aren't. So don't overestimate them. They're not going to do that much. There are 253 though, and there are 251 of the spears. They are your 2 largest battalion sizes. So whilst they're not trash, they do still perform that very wonderful role of dying. Arrow fodder is the name I give these units, and use them for that purpose. Similar stats, although they do have impetuous morale response. They do actually deal with morale shocks much better than the Orc Band. But the unit that will actually kill things are the Orc Maulers, with this absolutely fantastically over-the-top weapon, which just would be so unwieldy to use. They actually do look good. They're one of the few units, I think, in the roster that looks good. Whilst, yes, they are still grey and brown, which very much defines Mordor's colours and all the Orc Nation colours, they actually have a refinement to their unit that I really like. They are one of my favourite in this entire roster, I have to confess. And I don't think Dak even made them. I'm fairly certain we took this unit from a sub-mod on 3rd Age, another sub-mod of 3rd Age Total War, if memory serves. A mod called Bus, big unit sub-mod. I'm sure they came from that. But anyway, I actually like the look of them. They have a 5 attack that is effective against armor and a 6 charge, so they will actually kill things. They are very much the hammer to the anvil of the other 2 units, and less of an anvil, more of a puddle, a deeper puddle that bogs your enemy down but doesn't really do anything, whereas the maulers will kill something. So do charge them in. It's also worth noting that everything in Mordor's roster, apart from the elites, are cheap. So that's one of the key ways that you get so many units, is everything is cheap. And it's quite easy to train things, particularly with the large cities that you start with. You'd also get an archer at this first tier. You're not actually devoid of archers as Mordor. You do have a few options. And the first one are the scats. Orc scats. They have 2 missile attack, 2 melee attack, 2 charge bonus, and a total defense of 3. So rubbish melee stats, very much in the trash tier, but an archer unit with 228 people, no matter how poor their missile damage might be, will still kill things. There are lots of units out there that have no defense against archers, and 228 2-damage arrows hitting you in your armorless chest is still going to kill you. So Orc Scouts do have a place and a purpose, and you will find use for them in your army. But then we come to the second tier and units that really will start to do things. The first are the Orc Host. Orc Host are upgraded versions of Raiders. They have 4 attack, 3 charge, and 8 defense, almost twice as good across the board as Orc Raiders for only 200 more in cost. They are almost double the cost, but not quite. 228 Orcs again, which is a goodly number. Average morale already by tier 2, that's not bad at all. But again, slow movement speed. You like fighting in forests, you like fighting in the winter, you don't like fighting out in the open plains. Orcs like cover. And you don't like fighting in Baron for exactly that same reason. You like cover. So Orc Host, just your standard sword and board. Not very expensive, but not going to really win any awards by any stretch of the imagination. Morannon Guard. Now, Morannon Guard are a better spear unit, and previous iterations of the mod, they were restricted to the Black Gate. They are no longer. Now they're available everywhere. They're just an upgraded version of your previous Orc band. And quite upgraded, again, almost double the boosted in stats for just shy of twice the cost. If you can get these over the band, always do, because this unit will actually do things. Many's the time I've foolishly charged cavalry into Morannon Guard thinking, that's Mordor trash, we will be fine. And actually the fact that there are 228 of them have slaughtered my cavalry. Now that's also to do with the fact that I leave cavalry in battle and forget about it. But they are the first unit that will actually stop a cavalry charge and will do something about it. The Orc band will still just melt away because their attack's too low. So even though they do get a bonus against cavalry, they can't really do anything about it. But the Morannon Guard can. So a good unit to train. Again, quite cheap, 590. Then we come to your next archer unit, the Orc Archers. These are just better versions of the Scouts. Again, 3 melee, 3 missile, 2 charge, 6 defense. So double the defense and 1 more on the stats up here, except the charge, which is still poor. That just means that they're going to survive a lot better. You'll note that their armor goes from 1 to 2, so when they get shot back at, they'll do well. But still, 3 armor. They won't do well, they'll just do better. But 3 armor is abysmal, and particularly you're up against Gondor. They get quite a few good archer units. I'm thinking Osgiliath veterans, who you'll fight against him with Boromir. Although no, that's the next version. Ithilien Rangers, they've got a number of them. Blackroot Vale archers, even Gondor militia will outclass archer militia. Sorry, will outclass your Orc archers. So whilst they are useful, and with the 3 missile and 178 of them, they're gonna do damage. They're still not fantastic, and you are not by any stretch of the imagination an archer nation. So always keep that in mind. Now we come to your main tier. These 3 units will be the bulk of your army for most of the game. They are the Black Uruks of Mordor. And the first unit is just called Black Uruks, and here they are. They are a sword and board, 8 attack, 3 charge, 16 defense. So that does seem quite good, but remember that at this tier, in your chief enemy, Gondor, you are massively outclassed. So it is still a slog as Mordor, and you do still win through numbers. That is generally speaking how you win, because most of your units are, on the whole, worse than their human counterpart. Good morale, impetuous morale response, so still not excellent morale, but at least it's good. They'll fight a little bit longer, but morale is a major player in the game and is one of the key ways of beating Horde Orc nations. Now, you are playing as the human, so you will probably always have a commander, which negates the morale debuff that Mordor suffers from quite successfully. But the AI, of course, doesn't. So when you're fighting against Mordor, Note that the AI often doesn't bother with generals, and it's very easy to mass rout 2,000 orcs in one battle and win overwhelming victories time and time again. Which you need to, because Mordor has so many units. Next up are the Black Uruk Halberds. Halberds are a good solid unit. Armor piercing, 5 attack, 6 charge, 13 defense. They're excellent units to hold the line with because they will actually start killing the enemy because of their armor piercing. They also get a relatively good animation, but it's nowhere near the pike. They're not in the same league. It's the same animation as, or their animation is in the same league, rather, as most other melee animations. So don't think that because they've got the halberd, you're going to get thousands and thousands of kills. They're very, very good against cavalry. They're absolute monsters against cavalry, and they will hold the line against units as well. For, again, a relatively cheap cost, so a good halberd unit. And then we come to your last available everywhere archer, which are the Black Uruk archers. The first one that will actually do things. So 5 missile attack. And when I say do things, what I mean is this is the one that will actually kill late game units. Whilst it is useful having 228 2-missile damage arrows hitting your enemy, if they hit an enemy that has, say, 30 defense, they're not going to do anything. So those units do get outclassed, and it is time to bring in your heavy hitters. And your heavy hitters, are Black Uruk archers. 12 total defense, so they're not very good if the enemy catches them in melee, and they don't like to be shot back at. But do note that of their 12 defense, 8 of that is armor. So their best defense is against arrows. Melee attack of 5 isn't too bad, but I mean, their melee stats are those of Gondor militia, so 2 tiers down of your main enemy. So don't get them in melee, is the short story there. Then we come to your elite tier, where we start now getting restrictions. And we'll start with the Sauron's Will. Sauron's Will is a very good shock infantry unit. They inspire your forces and they frighten the enemy, and they're effective against armor. They have a 10 attack with a 7 charge and a 17 defense. They are really good. Now, they cost 900. They're the first unit we've seen, really, that actually has a prohibitive cost. And they only come from Barad-dûr, the Morannon, or Minas Morgul. So they're restricted to those 3 locations. They have very good morale, still not excellent. Their movement speed is unaffected, though, so you run as fast as the humans do. And you also get bonuses against mounts. They're good against cavalry as well. So a really, really good shock infantry unit. Very worthwhile filling your roster with Sauron's Will. They will do some damage. And if you need an anvil to keep the enemy steady while Sauron's Will thwacks into the side, then look no further than the Tower of the Moon, for the Morgul chosen stand resplendent in their solid iron-looking armour. And that is exactly what they will do. A 20 total defense, but with a relatively low attack of 5. They will hold the line really well, but they might not kill very much. So do watch out for that. And remember that Gothmog has this as his bodyguard, so he's a very good defensive general. He's not a very good aggressive one. They again come from Minas Morgul, Cirith Ungol, or the Morannon. Now they are of course Morgul chosen, and then so you'd expect them to only come from Minas Morgul, but we did take the conscious decision to allow these 2 units to come from 3 locations rather than 1, because Mordor has an awful tendency to just fill their armies with Black Uruks or this tier here. So almost all of their armies are made up of these 6 units, and it's just so boring to fight against. So we tried to expand it out a bit, and it has worked. And you do generally now see Mordor with more varied armies. Also coming in at your Uber tier, and arguably a tier above to be honest, are the then Black Númenóreans. Temple Wards, Temple Marksmen, and Temple Knights standing over there on the right. All 3 of these come out of the Dark Númenórean Tower building, which can only be built in Durthang. In the next version of the mod, you will also get this unit from Minas Tirith, but in your version of the mod, you will not get them from Minas Tirith. But they are the Temple Wards. They're a 2-handed sword, so they are again shock infantry, but they're not effective against armor. They inspire your forces and they frighten the enemies again. Their attack is 16, their charge is 8, and their defense is 28. So in many ways, they are a very, very good version of Sauron's Will. The only thing they lack is the armor piercing, but they make up for that in having nearly 1.5 times the attack, or more than 1.5 times the attack of Sauron's Will. But do note, Temple Wards are now very expensive, up at the 1,200, so you've got to watch out for that. They have excellent morale, impetuous response, 100% speed. They are a deadly, deadly unit. Really, really good. They can actually deal with Gondor. They are as good as some of Gondor's elites. So they're one of the units that really will hold the line for you. You don't really want to use them defensively, despite their high defense. You want to be attacking with them, but if you need to, they can perform either role with ease. And then we come to the archers then, the temple marksmen, and they are fantastic archers. So 7 missile attack, that's up there as one of the highest, if not the highest, of all human archer missile stats. So a very good archer unit. Their melee attack is 11 as well, with a 22 defense, makes them fantastic melee units when they finished. They can place stakes in your army, so they're your stake placing unit. And again, they inspire your forces. They also are effective against armor with their bows. They are armor-piercing archers because they wield the great steel bow of Numenor. And we've represented the steel bow through armor piercing. So an absolutely fantastic unit. 180 meter range, high accuracy, 24 missiles. And they're written there, steel arrows, armor piercing. They are fantastic archers, but they only come from one location, so they are really, really rare. The most you will actually get to use these is that there are 2 of your Nazgul have these as their bodyguard. So of course there are 6 Nazgul to join you as Mordor. One of them has the Temple Knights, that's the Witch King, and then of the other 5, I'm sure 2 are archers and 3 are swords, I think. But in any event, all of the Nazgul have one of these 2 as a bodyguard, except the Witch King, who has the Temple Knights. And speaking of the Temple Knights, we'll come over to them now. They are, of course, monstrous cavalry. Fantastic on the field. Again, they inspire your forces. They get a bonus against other cavalry, which is nice. Now, they don't have a lance or a spear. They are sword only. So their attack is 12, their charge is 8. But they're 29 total offense. They are absolute monsters on the field, but of course you don't get them till very late in the game. But your cavalry then, through the Temple Knights, are easily better than Gondor's cavalry. Gondor are not a cavalry nation either. So it's against Dol Amroth, who will put you to shame. But of course, Dol Amroth will, if you're playing as Mordor, Dol Amroth isn't a problem. You'll have them, the AI will deal with them, and then you'll just swoop in and finish them off. So that's not a problem. So against your chief enemy, you will have better cavalry options in terms of raw damage. But of course, Gondor get Gondor cavalry militia, so they will have more horses on the field than you will ever field, sorry. No change to their movement speed. They're very good morale, and it's locked, so they won't run away. And as I've now laboured the point greatly, they are the Witch King's bodyguard. Right, and then we come to the last of the cavalry before we deal with your bodyguards. Yes, so those 3 or those 4 units there mark the last of your foot units. And then we come to your actual monsters. Now, I've grouped them all together, but you've all seen trolls before. Trolls in version 4.5 have been homogenized. So if the Misty Mountain troll, the Dol Guldur troll, the Isengard troll, and the Mordor troll are all identical now. So you've seen this unit before. But it has 5 hit points, 30 defense, 38 attack, and a 10 charge. They're fantastic units. They're excellent at causing disruption amongst the enemy. They're fantastic at stopping archers, which is one of their best traits, to be honest, because they make the entire battalion stop firing. They are very, very, very susceptible to siege, so watch out for that. They will they will get 1 hit by a ballista bolt or a catapult shot. They have no defense against those. They die instantly to them. They're also very weak to javelin fire because of their large hitboxes, and they don't like going up against armor-piercing enemies, so watch out for that. They have a direct upgrade if you're playing as Mordor, though, the Olog High. And of course they are just that. They're just a better version. More defense, more attack, more charge, more hit points. But otherwise, fight in exactly the same way with them. Disrupt the enemy lines. Try not to get bogged down in battle for too long, because their large hitboxes will rapidly see their defense and hit points go down. Now, against normal early tier units, then you've got nothing to worry about. But against late game units, if you do leave them in melee too long, a single battalion of, say, Knights of the Talon Knights or the White Knights, no, what are they called? I can't remember. The sword unit from the Tower of Icthelion. I've completely forgotten their name. Basically, the elite sword unit that Gondor gets would deal with a unit of these, I should imagine. But the unit that's really, really good for you and really quite unique are your rhino-like units, the Great Beasts. Now, these are in fact just actual elephants, and they are about as big as an elephant from the base game. And you use them as you would use elephants. So watch out for pikes, watch out for javelins, watch out for siege. Exactly the same things with the trolls, except these ones are very susceptible to anti-cavalry. As has been mentioned many times, trolls are actually infantry, so pikes and spears have no benefit against them. Particularly also stakes don't affect them either. But the Great Beasts are affected by all those things. Apart from stakes, actually, you'll never fight against stakes as the AI, but if you are defending against Great Beasts, note that elephants have the trait that they crush stakes. They don't actually die on them. So you don't want these to charge into stakes if you're fighting against them. But Great Beasts have some javelin men on the back, as you can see. They're all standing ready to throw, so you can try and use that as an advantage. But they are used exactly the same way you'd use chariots. Just run them through the enemy, cause mass disruption. Don't get them bogged down because they'll die quickly despite their good stats. They are, again, very weak to siege, and they also, this one, is very weak to archers. So trolls are weak to archers, but their hitbox isn't as big, whereas obviously this unit is about 7 or 8 trolls size. So arrow fire is absolutely deadly against Great Beasts because every single arrow basically will hit and will do a lot of damage. So watch out for range, any type of range basically. And don't run them into pikes either. But otherwise, they are possibly one of the best elephant units in the game. Mumakil are a little too big, I think, for the engine to really handle. And their hitbox is so gigantic that they're actually a joke, to be honest. And there's almost nothing we can do about it. They look cool, and it's fun to run them through infantry, but arrow fire will just decimate Mumakil. The Great Beasts don't suffer from that as much, and I find that they're actually the best elephant unit in the game. So a very good one to have if you can. Now, they only come from your plains regions, which is basically the 4 main regions in the heartland of Mordor. So Nirn and the region that Saragost is in, I can't remember what it was called, Barad-dûr, and the settlement to the west of it. So there's 4 main locations that you get these from, or 5 I think actually, because there's a castle in the middle of Mordor as well. So a good unit. But you did note there that they cost 2,000 gold coins, so fairly expensive. Take a breath. Then we come to Uruk Bodyguard. Uruk Bodyguard are your standard bodyguard. They're one of the most plain and boring bodyguards the game has. They are armor-piercing, despite only wielding a large sword. Some of them have a shield, but many of them seem to not. Although they do. They just have this pathetically tiny little arm shield, which is reflected in their low shield stat. There's not much to say about them. They're sword and board. There's 79 of them. Good morale, impetuous. No movement speed changes. It's good that they're armor piercing, so you can take a few. They're a very good unit early tier, but they'll very quickly be surpassed in the later game. But in the later game, once you've captured the ring, you will finally get Sauron. Now, Sauron does not appear in custom battle. He never will, because generals don't appear in custom battle. You cannot get generals in custom. So all you get is his unit, which is just called Sauron, because you will only ever see this unit with Sauron unless you're playing a custom battle. First of all, you'll note he has his own custom banner. I talked about that last time. I think that's very, very cool. So if you are far above the field, generally speaking, let's click on a unit over there, you can see where Sauron is because his is the only banner that actually has some colour to it. Everyone else has those blackened banners. They are a really, really good unit, and they have been buffed in version 5 as well. But Sauron's bodyguard has the following traits. So first of all, they have a 20 attack, an 8 charge, and a 40 total defense. They are imbued by Sauron's power. 3 hit points per man as well. There are 65 of them. Their eyes glow. They're just a monster. They inspire your forces, of course. They get a bonus against cavalry. They're armor piercing. They frighten the enemy. All of the above. They're relentless as well, so they cannot be staggered, which is one of their biggest selling points. You have 65 unstaggerable monsters who will just plow through anything they hit. They cannot run away unless you tell them to. Their morale response is only good though, and that just means they don't charge without orders. That means they're disciplined. And as I say, they get a bonus against mounts. They're a very, very, very good unit, and it solves the problem of having multiple Saurons, and it also solves the problem of Sauron being an elephant and crashing the game. That is why he has been relegated essentially to a bodyguard, a foot bodyguard. And it's up to each person whether or not you want to think they're Dark Numenorians or are they some sort of wraith. We've given them glowing golden eyes because why not? And I think they're a fantastic unit. And as I say, they have actually been buffed still further in version 5. Sauron is a really deadly unit and does a lot. He's very, very good. And that completes the Mordor roster. So let's add everyone to the same group, give them over to the AI, turn that off, and then turn that one off separately. No, I've pressed the wrong button again, haven't I? F7, there we are. And then we can pass over to the game and see who we're playing. So there are only now 3 of these videos remaining, and so the Guess the Who's Next game is really cutting down to the wire. But we will still play, because why not? What you can maybe see here is that there's a lot of cavalry, and they've all got, by the looks of it, flags on their backs. There is a lot of red colouring on the field over there, with some orange tinged before that unit charging ahead, and then more cavalry over on the side again. They haven't got any siege this time, which is interesting. And it is, of course, the Variags of Khand. That is who we will cover next week. I should mention that there is only Isengard and Dunland left, and we will do those two last together. Not in one video, but they will follow on from one another. They're the last two to come after the Khandish Raiders. Khand is a very, very cool faction, and one of my favourites, I have to say, but sadly wasted in quite possibly the worst position in the world. And Khand is an absolutely prime example of why the Oricani as a faction would be so dull. Not only, first of all, the Oricani as a faction would never happen because the Oricani mountains are quite literally miles and miles and miles away. And so it would just totally, I couldn't have an Oricani faction. They're not represented by the map that we use, and we can't extend the map any further. But also, if we brought in an Oricani faction, it would be like Khand. You would have one enemy to fight, which would be Rune, and then your campaign would be an absolute doddle. And it would just be so boring. You'd spend most of your campaign running your armies from your heartland to the front. One of the reasons why when you play as basically anyone else, Khand gets quite a few auto-expansion provinces to bring them into Horondor is because if we don't do that, Harad cuts Khand off and they spend the entire game sitting in the corner of the map doing nothing. Which I must confess that if I were the only person in the modding team, if everyone else just up and left, I would remove Khand from the game in a heartbeat. And I would have Khand as their whole roster where I would transfer to mercenaries, and I would have the Blue Wizard script affect whoever held the regions of Khand at the time. So I would have Khand, the Blue Wizards come back, and if you're playing as an evil nation, they'll bring with them the extra units, the dwarven units and whatnot, and they'd bring with them the full might of Khand, and they'd spawn on your eastern side, and you'd suddenly have to deal with this uprising, this newly come horde faction. And if you were playing as a good nation, then the Blue Wizards or Khand would spawn with the bodies of the Blue Wizards at the head of their army, and they'd be coming at Sauron's call. And they'd come to rid the world of you, basically. That is how I would have Khand. So I'd have them as an event rather than a faction, because I just don't think where they start in the world is good enough. Their roster, though, looks absolutely fantastic. I love the blend of real-life Eastern cultures. So as you can see, they've all got the flag on their back, which is very reminiscent of medieval warfare in Japan. Something that we've all seen and all sort of subtly recognised. Then they have sort of Persian-inspired units as well, like the Variags, the Warlord's Guard unit, and there's a mounted version of this one as well. And I just think they look really, really, really good. But I do think they're wasted as a faction, and I absolutely would remove them and have them as an event. But I am overruled on that every time I suggest it, so I stopped suggesting it. But anyway, that is who is next, Khand, and you'll note that there's some dwarves there as well, because of course if you're playing as Khand, there's a chance you're going to get Oricani warriors, as we will cover next week. But for now, that concludes, so thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have, and until we speak again, dear friends, Navar Naden Pedamad Melonin, and farewell.